Almost every 500 employee company risks losing over 4 million each year, not from poor sales or failed products, but from something far more silent: employee turnover. Now imagine keeping 95% of your team happy, motivated, and thriving. What would that mean for your bottom line? Our guest today didn't just imagine it, she built an entire company to solve it, with a background rooted in leadership and a mission to make expert led coaching accessible to all. She is helping organizations retain talent and unlock massive value by developing their people, not replacing them. She's the founder of Terawatt, a B2B marketplace helping businesses slash turnover and spark long term growth. Welcome to another episode of our Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who help you by sharing their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. In this episode, I talk to Francie, the founder of Terawatt. Francie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ash. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or
Mm.
motivates you would like to share with our audience?
Yes, actually, it's not like a very well known quote. I mean, it's not. It's I used to have this incredible therapist, and she would sometimes say to me, "Just play your side of the tennis court." And basically, her point was,
Hmm.
just do what you think is right, and don't anticipate what the other person's going to do. Just kind of like do it for you, do it for what makes sense to you, and then see what happens. And I love that because it does happen a lot of times when you're in a conversation with somebody and they're kind of playing out, they're almost like role playing in their mind what the other person's going to say, but you really don't know what the other person's going to say or do or whatever when you kind of say what you think is right in your heart.
Hmm.
And I think about that all the time for myself because it's just a way to kind of focus back on just you and not kind of like gaming something, but really just living like in your truth and saying what's in your mind and not being political and all that stuff. You know, I feel like we can get so sort of caught up in all the minutia of of I don't know, connecting with people instead of just like truly like saying what you want, you know, trying to do what you want and then just letting the chips fall kind of where they may.
Yeah, definitely. Play the ball when it's on your court because you don't know how the other player is going to play, right?
Right, right, right.
Great stuff. So tell us about TerraWall. What does the product do? Who is it for? And what's the main problem you're helping to solve?
Hmm. Well, so we are the best way to understand Terawatt is it's Airbnb for executive coaching.
Hmm.
We're a marketplace. We just get paid a percentage of the match. And who we're matching is expert coaches and other experts. So they could be executive coaches or they may be some like a professor of negotiation. We have all kinds of interesting people. So we're connecting these experts to employers
Hmm.
who are purchasing their time and expertise on behalf of their employees. So we've got three stakeholders, but you can really think of it just like a typical matchmaking kind of marketplace.
Hmm.
Um, the reason there's three stakeholders, right, is because the employers are buying it on behalf of their employees, and it's a different to have someone buy something on behalf of you is different from buying it yourself. And so that's why we talk about the three stakeholders. And the buyer also is probably more likely to think about how what this purchase affects the bottom line for the company, how it affects the metrics of the organization.
Hmm.
Whereas the employee is much more likely to think about how it impacts them, their professional growth, their day-to-day problems. And so it's a different perspective. And so that's why we have these three groups. And you know, it's funny because initially the idea was to help individuals like be better, be great, and give them the opportunity to learn from experts.
Hmm.
And the idea is, you know, in a group, let's say it's 4 people or 20 people, you're splitting the cost of an expert, right?
Hmm.
So these are people who their hourly rate can range anywhere from like $100 an hour to $1,000 an hour. It could be even higher. And
Mm.
if you are a CEO or a C-suite leader, typically very expensive coaching like that is paid by your employer as part of your employment contract.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible because it's just a small percentage of their overall compensation. But if you, I call it the sophisticated middle. So if you have this group of people who are pretty knowledgeable about their job, but they don't make, let's say they make under $100,000 or something, the
Mm-hmm.
math just doesn't make sense to have one-on-one coaching with those experts because it's just a large percentage of their salary. But
Yeah.
if you can band together and come with colleagues who are in the same organization, and it could be all kinds of groups, then you reduce the cost on a per person basis. And then it's much more in line with sending somebody to a conference, which is very commonly done. And so
Mm.
I speak a lot about how this is a replacement for conferences. But what's interesting, so initially it was for the employees, right? How do we help them become better? But then what we realized is that all three of those stakeholders are able to be better with group coaching. It's not just the employees. It's not kind of like a nice to have, like maybe you have some extra cash, you can throw it over to group coaching, but actually when there's a ton of research, it's called, and if you want to look for yourself, you want to look under like human capital research or human capital investment.
Mm-hmm.
It's very high return on investment. So as an employer, if you have, and you really want to think about it as an investment because it comes back to the organization. It's not like you're giving a bonus to an employee and they buy a couch. Like that doesn't really benefit. I mean, indirectly it will benefit the organization because the person will be happy they got this money to buy the couch, fine. But
Yeah.
this is more like the more that you develop your employees and train them to be like the ideal employee that you want,
Mm-hmm.
then the more that impacts all the other metrics of these organizations. So like for a for-profit company, there's all this research showing higher revenue, higher profitability, higher innovation, um, de-siloing. And then even for like hospitals, it's like, lower error rate, lower burnout rate, more retained earnings, all these things like happen. And so one of my philosophies is that group coaching really should be looked at by the CFO as among the range of investments a company can make to drive it forward. So like if
Mm.
you're looking at your R&D budget, how much, because that's looked at as an investment, right? Like you're putting money into R&D and you hope to uh, return more money than you put in. And it's the
Yeah.
same with human capital. Or building a building or any of these things, right? Investing in even securities, let's say stocks, whatever. Um, and so that's kind of like my belief with all of this is that there's actually a ton of benefit and really almost no downside to this. And so that's kind of what I'm always trying to let people know about. And that's like the big thing that drives me with Terawatt.
Amazing. So it's like if I so I'm relating it to like if I'm going on a picnic and if I drive myself, I have to hire a car and then I drive myself. But if I go in a bus which is shared by my colleagues, then
Okay.
we go to the same place, we enjoy the journey more, we get almost equal value when you
Yeah.
go to the destination and then come back, and then you don't spend that much money to basically
Yeah.
acquire the skill set.
Yeah. Well, here's what a thing that I'd say is a little bit different, but very similar, right? I mean, here's the thing. The bus driver knows a shortcut.
Mm,
That's
yeah.
the difference.
Yeah.
So it's not just like you're getting on a crowded highway and you're going to be there anyway. It's more like you're taking a shortcut, you're learning something, all of you are learning together, you're learning from other people on the bus, and you're
Mm,
realizing, wow, the things that go through my head are going through everyone's head here, and makes you better able to communicate with other people and lead them and explain why this is one thing that's in your mind is a problem and educate everyone. And so that's really the way to think about it. Is it's a reduced cost, but like it's not like you're waiting in traffic. Like
mm,
if you're like a lot of times when you want to rent a car, you want to rent a car because you don't want to deal with other people. And I think that but the difference is yes, you'd have to like work with other people, but you get this big benefit, and that is you get there in half the time or something like that, and they give you lunch, or
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, like that kind of thing. Like all these other things start to happen that are different than what the typical way is. And so what we're really focused on is, customizing. And, we have one of our like philosophies is that customization at scale is possible.
Mm,
And I think, typically in the past, employees have really often don't like group learning scenarios because they're just told that they have to do it. There's no opt-in. And I
mm-hmm.
think that's a really important part of also our philosophy, which is employees opting in, making sure the engagement's there, making sure that they can vote and select on what they're learning, because that's when the real magic starts to happen too, because they're leaning in and they want to be there.
Indeed, indeed. So let's talk about where actually the story began. Where did the idea of a terawatt came from?
um, well, it's a sort of a long story. I always try to figure out how I can shorten it. But basically, I was realizing about this idea of in America, it turns out our peak of manufacturing was in the 1940s. And ever since then, it's those jobs have been going away.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of, you can look at any time series, but basically, and so I started to realize, thinking, well, wow, that's a lot of people are in that industry, and where do they go if their career is going away? Like, who helps them? Like, that was my question.
Yeah.
And also I was thinking, like, if people are stressed and afraid, does that lead to other bad things in society?
Mm.
And so those are like the two things I was sort of thinking about. And so initially I thought, oh, well, there must be like a Yahoo of career change, something that's like inexpensive, where you just go and it helps you and it does the trick. It's not great, but it's like good enough. And I
Mm-hmm.
really was shocked to find that like that didn't exist. And then I kept getting more and more obsessed about this idea. And so initially, actually, but the other thing I would like to say to everyone is, it's also really important to note that like I was really focused on the problem, and
Mm-hmm.
it took me a while to figure out the solution. I wanted to be for-profit because I'd gone to business school, and I find it really interesting to like talk about for-profit organizations or think about them, whenever, work on them. And I also wanted it to be something that was really truly about like very focused on helping the individual and not
Mm-hmm.
other angles. Like, I didn't want to be a headhunter. I didn't want to do have advertising or all these other things. I really truly wanted the whole product to be about making the person better in a very intellectually honest way.
Mm-hmm.
But so I guess that's all a long way of saying it took me a long time to find the right business model.
Mm-hmm.
And so initially I started as a community, and then evolved, and a million things changed, which is like kind of common in startup land. But now it's a marketplace. It's B2B, meaning we sell to employers. And one of the thing that's great about being a marketplace is that I'm not a coach by background.
Mm-hmm.
I love being coached. um, but what we really want is we want expert coaches to bring their expertise.
Yeah.
And I sort of talk about like we want all the stars in the sky of the coaches, meaning people bring such different experiences to them, and they talk about their practices really differently. And so what we really want to do is have talented coaches, and lots of them, that the employers can choose from,
Mm.
and that they can pitch to the employer what they think the solution is, because we don't have a way that we believe has to happen. It's more that we're just trying to make it really easy for a buyer to connect with these people. And so, for instance, we just had a search. One organization was trying to bring in mentorship within, like build from within a mentorship program for their organization, which is a really great idea. And it was like helping leaders like teach what they know, and then helping more junior people learn from the leaders, and trying to find a process for that. And it was really good idea. So we helped the employer create an RFP, like a request for proposal. So, because my joke is like we speak coach, and so we can put it in language that the coaches kind of like know what
Aware of,
that means,
yeah.
what the prompts are and stuff.
Yeah.
And so we put together a little request with a budget, and we sent it out to the coaches, and we got like 21 proposals. And
Wow.
then we sent those 21 proposals to the employer, and now we're waiting for their feedback. And the idea is then they can either say, oh, I want this person, this is exactly perfect for me, or they can say, let's whittle it down, whittle, I don't know what that expression is. We'll just like narrow it down to like, a few other people. Maybe we ask them a few more questions to get more committed, or more information about how they see it. And so we can like increase our commitment to the person. And sometimes when that's also happening, the employer will go to see like the website of the coach. Maybe they have a podcast, maybe they have a LinkedIn, and try to see like whose philosophy kind of aligns with the organization.
Organization, yeah.
And so there's all that going on. And so, because again, like we really want it to be an opt-in, a choice, and like we want the employer to have all the information that we have. Our secret sauce is not hiding these coaches. It's really like letting them shine. And I think that's, to me, that's like, again, like this very intellectually honest process of letting people decide for themselves, and not, and like leading with trust on our side. So, just as by way of comparison, a lot of coaching organizations out there get paid very differently. They don't get paid as a marketplace. They get paid through a subscription, or they get paid as a service business where they pay a coach a certain rate and they charge a different rate, and they make the spread, right? That's like the definition of a services business. And we don't do that. We just say to the coaches, you tell us your rate, and then we add 15% on top, and then we send it to the employer. And so the real expert coaches love that, because we're not underpaying the coaches and making a lot of money. It's really more about their rate and how they see the world. And we're just kind of like making it easier for them to have leads, new business.
Definitely. And I'm super intrigued with the idea, and I want to understand like how your revenue model works, etc. But before we go into that, let's talk about a little bit when you had this epiphany. Did you look into the market? Did you see if the competitors were doing something similar, or kind of like similar quality level or not? What was going on when you did your initial research? And
Yeah.
then what you found out which encouraged you to go forward with this idea?
Well, my initial research was I was really just trying to find a place where, there was a for-profit business, right, where people are just giving people the tools to be better and help them out. Um, and I think, it's interesting because like looking back, I guess theoretically these coaching businesses, I could have found them, but the language they were using to describe themselves just wasn't really what I was imagining. And it wasn't coming up on my searches, and it didn't feel like it was helping people at a crossroads. Um, it just didn't, somehow those businesses didn't feel like that was attacking the same problem for me. And it definitely wasn't coming up in my search. And so what happened, which was funny, is like I just kind of got obsessed with this problem, because I kept thinking like, well, I have zero background in this, but like I'm a little bit obsessed with doing this because I think it'd be really fun and interesting. And one of the things that like in this process I kind of realized is one of my superpowers is switching careers. And I think that because I know that it's not really that hard and not that scary to switch careers, but I know when I talk to people, when I do that, it freaks them out. And so that was one of my questions too, is like, I bet a lot of people as they're switching careers are very worried and scared and nervous about this. And they probably don't have a lot of support to help them think positively about it. I mean, the irony, of course, of all this stuff is like, I envision this as a B2C, so like helping individuals at Crossroads, and now it's B2B. But I do hope one day we get there, because I think that this is like an incredible opportunity for lots of people. It doesn't have to just be someone who's employed by an employer who believes in it. Ultimately, like there really should be support for everyone at all stages of your life for career stuff, because it just shouldn't be that like the people who have the money can afford to have this thing, because then you really have a big gap and knowledge between the haves and kind of the have-nots. And then what happens when like the more of the middle gets access to this incredible, these shortcuts, like the bus shortcut, right? What
Mm.
happens when you start to learn that stuff? Like, how does that help you in your life at home, at work, and other ways?
Yeah, yeah. And I really want to dig into more about how you actually started, because that's the story I want to share
Oh,
with the
sure.
listeners, right? Like the founder's journey. But before we get into that, let's quickly touch on, would you be able to give us a sense of the size of the business, where you are in terms of number of customers, number of coaches? Could
Yeah.
you, yeah.
Yeah. So the key with marketplaces is this two-sidedness, right?
Okay.
So we have almost like 100 coaches, and it keeps growing because that part is like semi-viral. It's working very well for us because everything we've come up with for Terawatt is um, the way coaches see their business and how they want to partner with other people.
Mm,
So typically, a lot of initially the people on the coaching side were college friends of mine, so people I've known for like 30 years.
mm,
Um, and then they started telling their friends, and so that's typically what's happened. A few people reach out through LinkedIn or other ways, but we vet all these people and we do criminal background checks and content checks and all that stuff, and so that part's going well. Our our customers, typically we have customers that just come back year after year, so we have like a handful of customers like that. The customer side is not nearly as high as the coach side.
mm,
That's my sort of focus right now, right? Is talking to more organizations, or really even pinpointing more narrowly who I want to be targeting, who is like the best um, organization that we can help. And so actually that's really interesting for any of your listeners who are curious about startup land, is that I spent a lot of time speaking to ed tech uh, advisors. I had did this like, I don't even know what you call it, but like a series of conversations with different advisors over a week. And the big thing that came out of that was, we're really focusing now on like hospitals. Um, we have some research about hospitals, and we also have some experience with hospital clients. And we're really focusing on organizations that have high employee turnover, because that's the why. Because that can reduce, group coaching and teaching people psychological safety reduces employee turnover. And there's a lot of research about that, and also makes makes the team stronger, better products.
indeed. Yeah.
So we're really trying to narrow who we're marketing towards, even though we'll work with anyone, but just it's like almost like a startup strategy is to like come up with like a really
Niche.
now also we're doing for-profit hospitals. So that was the new
Mm,
thing we just added. So it's like for-profit hospitals. And a lot of what's happening, I think, at these hospitals, and the reason turnover is so high, is that it's like one of these few organizations in at least America that's really hierarchical. That's not the way. I mean, certainly an organization is hierarchical because you have a boss and you feel below them, but I think there's like a general sense of like everyone has a voice in a way, whereas in the hospitals, they're almost like these different groups of people, and they have different sort of status. Like this doctor
mm,
has a different status, and the nurses and the techs, and then there's like the admin. And I think it just kind of is hard for these organizations to kind of get everyone going in the same direction. And I do think psychological safety and coaching would help with that. And so that's part of it too. And it's funny. I just looked up another industry. Like I was saying, the construction industry has 68% employee turnover.
wow.
So, I mean, I know nothing about construction, but that could be another interesting one to look at too, because I think because when you look at the cost of turnover with a high turnover organization, it's just millions of dollars. I mean, this
Mm,
one case study they had 4,500 employees and 24% employee turnover rate, and they're able
mm,
to reach to 4% through one of our coaches' content. And that turned out to be a $32 million delta.
there
So,
you go.
once they got to 4% turnover, they had $32 million more dollars a year to spend on whatever they wanted. And that's really like the fantasy for all these companies, because there's no downside to having bad turnover. When you have low turnover, you have fewer errors. It's easier to recruit people. You're not paying for temporary workers anyway. And so that's kind of how we've been focusing. I think that that's definitely something I always want to share with people is you hear it a little bit in the world, like focus on like narrowing who your customer is, but it does make it a lot easier on the marketing side when you have a very
Mm.
narrow customer focus.
Yeah, and that's particularly interesting because B2B sales are super hard. Everybody knows that in the founder space. But you have figured out a way where you can demonstrate the delta to the businesses, and that's what they're looking for. They're always looking for either to make more money or save on whatever they're
Right.
investing upon. So let's go dig deeper into that. Would you be able to share with our listeners about how did you got your first customer?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's really hard in startup land too, is the first customer. I think the one thing I'll say about that is I think there's no substitute for, trust and developing relationships. Um, in my old career, I used to say, no one's ever going to love you as much as the people who knew you from before. It's always going to be a longer journey. And I think the key is to try to find people in your network who have this problem, and you don't need to sell them hard, but just let them know, this exists for them if this could be a problem they'd like to explore. And so the first customer we had actually is this one customer who was doing the that mentorship search. We do stuff with them every year, and it's really fun, and they're a tech company.
Mm-hmm.
But it gave us, once we got that first customer, it just gave us and me a lot more confidence that this was valuable for people. And so I do think the first customer is really valuable. And then also figuring out the scaling for sales is really valuable. I mean, that's sort of the fun part about startups is like every time you kind of figure out one thing, there's like another thing to figure out because you've got a different problem the next day. Um, but yeah, so I think really developing relationships and via authenticity. I haven't found for us any of these scale, like I'm putting air quotes, scalable sales don't really, I haven't found any like, mass emailing works. I haven't found Google ads working. I have, all these kinds of things. We did a bunch of, what do you call them? Like booths at conferences, but that was not great for sales. I'm speaking at 2 conferences, like on the stage this summer. I'm really curious to see if that leads to sales. It may not. Um, but it takes a lot of energy and effort to get on the stage because you have to like pitch your ideas like 8 months in advance and it's competitive. So I'm like fascinated to see if that works. But I really think that like what I'm starting to do really now is, you know, try to come up with some interesting creative ways to see who is hiring the most people as what's the word, as a shortcut to who has the highest turnover. Who has the
Mm.
most jobs open. Those are most likely the people that are going to be receptive to this. And so I think, to me, like for anyone who's interested in startups, is like, what's the insight you can come up with, or like a shortcut you can come up with that creates sort of a proxy for your ideal customer. And for me, I finally figured out it was like this. I made this up, like a ratio of like hiring people you're looking to hire over total employees.
Mm.
And so if you have a lot of people you're trying to hire, and it's actually a pretty high percentage, like it's of all the people who are like hiring, it's the highest percentage, and those people probably have the highest turnover. And by the way, these organizations like hospitals do not promote or give any numbers about their employee turnover rate because that would also probably discourage people from using their hospitals.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and so it's
I
really
mean,
hard to find.
one of the biggest challenge we have here in UK is care workers. So we don't have many care workers in our care homes, and that pushes our government or private sector actually to bring people from overseas. But then people started misusing it quite a lot. They come here, get employment through a company to work as a care worker. They go to a care worker job for like day one, few hours, and then they come back and then they never work there. So then
Well,
they use the same immigration documentation for something else. For example, working in an office as a desk job or something like that.
Oh,
That has become been a very big issue for organizations like care homes, um, hospitals, any kind of medical
yeah,
professional organization. And then again, like the organization who teaches you or trains you to become a care worker, they also suffer quite a lot. So I don't know
yeah.
if this is something you have in equivalent in states or
Oh, what's interesting, I'm thinking, I just thinking like so care worker meaning like it's like a person who bathes almost
yeah,
like is that
yeah,
like someone
like
who helps the patients, not a nurse, it's someone who's like helping them with their daily
helping
stuff.
them daily stuff. Yeah, for
Yeah,
example, like if you have a old age home, like you have 10 occupants there, but you need 21
yeah,
or actually 30 helpers, care workers for them. One person will be taking care of their morning, one person will be taking care of their evening, potentially one for the night. Different activities at different time of the day, right? And you require them. That cost a lot of money, but then these
yeah,
people have been paying taxes and they have savings, so they want to take care of them. And so some of the people are younger people, not necessarily old age people, but they require helpers or caretakers there, right? So yeah, this has become I mean,
that's
you
so
will see
yeah,
news about it
yeah.
every single day in UK.
I think so. I mean, the thing that I know about in the States, and that may also exist in the States, I don't still know about it, but the
Yeah.
one thing that I often hear about is this like traveling nurses program, which is a big thing in the States where you pay, I don't know the ratio, but it's a lot more than what you'd pay a full-time employee. So let's say maybe it's double, but
Mm,
you basically say, okay, we need a traveling nurse for 6 months, and you almost pay them like an overtime rate,
mm,
and then they leave, but you're sort of like plugging a hole, but it just becomes very expensive because and that's why I think that no, that 32 million was so high for that one hospital that we have the case study for, because I bet they were doing a lot of hole plugging with these traveling nurses or paying overtime or doing all these like these solutions that cost a lot of money instead of actually like developing their employees to be what they wanted, or find a way to make it for them. It was really psychological safety, which is super interesting. And
mm.
so then people stopped leaving because it became safer for them to say what they wanted or to come up with solutions that they saw were a problem that weren't getting solved. And one of my jokes is like, I think there's something in a human, it's like a human nature to always have this grass is greener perspective where, oh, we're just going to hire the star. Somebody else is going to be a star, is going to come in, they're going to make everything better, it'll change the whole culture. But hiring a star has a lot of problems too. Like that could be somebody who doesn't play well with others. That could actually make the culture worse. So what I say is like the best thing to do really is just find ways to train your current employees to be the star you want to hire
Mm.
and develop them. And then you create this whole culture where everyone's just trying to be great and work together. And then you don't have to be constantly looking for people outside to like solve your problem. You're solving your own problem.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I think there's a multi-million dollar company who just got acquired by a big organization in US, which operates in this temporary nursing niche in years. I was listening to a
Mm,
podcast the other day, and this person who owns this company just got exited, and it's somewhere around 600 million or something. So it was
mm,
fascinating to me to hear that this industry could be that big.
mm,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, I'm so deeply interested in this topic, but we are restricted of time, so we have a couple of more sections in our episode. Um, before we move to our lightning round, I would like to take a personal opinion from your side. So, for example, throughout your founder's journey, right, you had multiple experiences. There must have been valuable lessons learned. If you don't mind sharing, could you
mm.
reflect on your experiences and tell us about a mistake or a setback you encountered along the way, or maybe not a mistake, just something you learn, right? And then additionally, what advice would you give our listeners based on that particular experience?
Yeah. Well, so, one thing that I think is funny when I look back is um, I would just say a caution to people that virality is rare. When
Mm,
things go viral, it sounds like nowadays it says, "Oh, just this will go viral. People will love this idea," and it really turns out that getting a new idea out there is quite hard. And I think, and so knowing that, people always strive for like what is the way to sort of blanket the world with like your ideas. But I
mm,
actually think the better way to try to go viral or to try to get people to latch on to a new idea is really just to go one by one and
mm,
really like bring people into the fold. And it's that whole idea of like to go slower, to go faster. I think goes better for startups when you can really say like, okay, like I need to like find a way to, you know, find a way, a process to reach out to my ideal customer, and then have a great, and then okay, the A, then have a great conversation with my ideal customer. Then B, like have them really truly understand the benefit. And I think the more that you can focus on like the small things, the more likely you are to go viral. But also that I think it's that like focus on the individual because there's so much learning on like just the exchange with humans. And so I guess the other thing I would say, which is related to that, is I find with Terawatt, whenever I'm kind of at a plateau, the key really is like connecting with other people and getting other people's ideas or input. And then
mm,
that's what helps me to like go further. And partly I'm like a single founder. I mean, I have a co-founder, but like I find that it's really the connecting with people. And there's also this kind of thing within tech where there's this assumption, I think, that, oh, we don't really need people. It's tech. It's just we're going to like, do some things and build a website and it'll be great. But really, it is understanding the psychology really deeply and being a real expert in like how your customer thinks. And you can only really know that by really spending, I think, a lot of time with them. And
it's all about people, no matter which
yeah,
industry you are, because even if you're in AI and everything is done by AI, there's somebody somewhere sitting and clicking a button and writing something, right? So you need to understand it. Well, thanks so much, Francie. Let's move on to our quickfire round then. I've got six quickfire questions for you, so you can answer them as quickly if you want. If you think one of the question you don't want to answer, you can tell me to skip. No, nothing. We don't have to stick to that question. We can move to the next one. Is that okay?
so okay,
Yep,
sounds
great.
great.
So first, what is the top three strategies for businesses to retain their employees in 2025?
Well, group coaching is number one. I think finding ways to hear employees' opinions and then act on their suggestions. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you do group coaching or not, I think like even just like creating a survey and finding ways to make some changes based on what employees want. I think that's an incredible way to make a better culture at an organization. Um, I think, oh, and there's this great research piece that I think about all the time. It was written by McKinsey, and it was saying that the best global companies are the companies that both develop people and manage for metrics and accountability. So,
Mm,
meaning, you know, if all you're doing is like developing people, that's great. You've got like a company full of stars and people who speak really well and eloquently in meetings. But the goal, right, is like to have that higher efficiency or whatever the metric that you're solving for. Usually people care about profitability. um, but when you combine those two things, that produces the best organization. And I think that's true for profit, but for everyone, right? Because
mm.
in the end, you have to know like what's happening now, what happened in the past, what are you striving to change, and the metrics really help you understand how that is changing. And I think unless you're really measuring it, it's going to all be like theoretical and woo woo.
It definitely helps to put it there. as a visual uh, element in front of the people, not just to the people who are making decision, but also the people who are trying to improve themselves, because it helps. So definitely agree with you on that point. What book would you recommend to our audience, and why?
Oh, oh, okay. I have this book that I'm obsessed with, and it's called Turn the Ship Around.
Hmm.
Um, and it was written by a U.S. Navy uh, captain of a nuclear submarine,
Wow.
and he basically, it was so interesting. The problem was that as the captain of the ship, or the head, I forget that, I might be using the wrong terminology, but basically the head guy at the ship, he was basically responsible for every single teeny tiny detail. So
Hmm.
people would be coming up to him saying things like, "Hey, I need to replace like this screw. Are you okay with that?" Like that kind of stuff. And he was like, I can't, and we can imagine the bottleneck, but then also, I mean, he's not an expert in like what screw goes in. And so he basically changed the whole structure of the organization so that everyone became a specialist in their area. And instead of asking him, like, what should I do? We have a faulty screw. They would say, "Sir, I've done the research. We have a faulty screw. I, this is what we have on board. I think this was the best one because XYZ." And so basically, like pitching him on how
Hmm.
they're going to do it. And he could ask a few questions and then give them feedback. But then that didn't make him the expert. It was more that he was like like the wise sort of person guiding them towards the best answer. And as a result, like when he first started on that ship, it had like the worst morale, had the worst scores. Like every year, like they would have these like war games sort of simulation and
Hmm.
had the worst scores there. And then everything flipped. Like once he came up with this new structure, like they were the top ship, everyone wanted to get on the ship, everyone was getting promoted, the culture was great, and they were changing all these different things that just led to a lot more happiness among and more like higher morale among the shipmates, whatever you call the people on the ships. I'm
Yeah.
so poor on the military language, but that book is great. So it's called Turn the Ship Around, and he's kind of like a little bit of I think a guru a little bit. I just think that book is incredible because for me, I always think of like such like to me, the military is the most hierarchical structure.
Hmm.
And so it's so interesting to come up with a different way to do it that still kind of works with this like command structure. And so I
Yeah.
find it fascinating.
Cool. Cool. I'll add that up into my reading list then later on.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Mm. Um, Actually, I think it's like a few things at once because like nobody knows everything. So you're going to have to always be blind on some things. But I think it's like the ability to be curious, um, but the ability to try and fail. And not, I hate the word fail, but like, do get feedback, be a doer. So it's like, be curious, be a doer, be a thinker, be like an imaginer. Like, that's the thing with the founder stuff is like, it's sort of, I think it's really hard to put your finger on exactly what works, but you have to have all these different ways of being. But by the way, these are all learnable things, right? I mean, everyone might have been in some career where they didn't want you to be curious. They kind of wanted you to focus on the task at hand. And like, so then you have to learn a little bit how to be curious, or maybe you're a doer, but you like dive in too quickly, and you have to like be more curious and understand the pros and cons. And anyway, all that stuff is like learnable. But I just think the more that you can find ways to balance the big thinking and with like processes and communication, that's the key.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Well, what's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Hmm. Okay, this is so generic, but I am obsessed these days with ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
I use
Mm-hmm.
it. I finally just started paying for the monthly pro because I kept maxing out my questions to it. But what it really helps me out with is shortening my writing,
Mm.
and that and then it kind of knows my writing style because there's always so many emails I'm writing and they're often very similar to the ones I've written before. So I really want to have like great like a format that's really well thought out. But it's also succinct.
Mm.
And so that's what I'm always working on with it is like, hey, like knowing what I say on Terawatt's homepage, please help me with a pitch email to this person, or you know what I mean? I love to like infuse my writing with other like reference points. And
Mm.
that's like a really smart, sharp way to do it. Also, I've been a little bit off the game, but I'm trying to do like this vibe coding thing off of with ChatGPT to create like a little process. Like I don't know software coding at all, and I find that really interesting. I really just love the synthesis of it. Like that to me is what really has been missing from the
Mm.
internet for really a long time, right? For me, like I just want. Sometimes you want to know the average or you want to know facts. Like so, what's interesting to me about ChatGPT is it's not an expert; it's the average.
Mm.
So, which is good for facts. So, like, if you want to know what were the biggest news things that happened in 1910, like, that's a great question to ask it. If you want to know what, like, the smartest person in psychology thinks about XYZ, like, maybe that will help you, but you might want to just, like, go to that person's stuff. But I do find that, like, writing is a really, and then it learns my writing. So, also, it's not like I want the average email, but it's like I want them to say, okay, here's how I want to say it. This is the vibe I'm
Mm.
looking for, and then it kind of learns it, and then it keeps it in its little repository. I find that so valuable.
Interesting. What 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 a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time and money?
Mm, a good one. I mean, I always thought that this idea could also work for psychology. Um, what's interesting is that it's a whole different business model because there's insurance involved and diagnoses and doctors. And then you have like in America, at least there's like state by state regulation of all those things. But I still do think that like that would be a really cool thing to do as well, because I remember when I had this therapist a while back, she also had a group practice where she would bring people in, and the whole idea was to learn from other people about how similar everyone was and stop kind of being so closed off and feeling like the way you thought about the world was just specific to you, but realizing that there's so many people feeling the same way and like that kind of connection. And I really do think like that could be a great business, because now people are figuring out more and more like the med tech stuff and how to do, remote medicine. And it definitely could, I think it could be really cool.
Yeah.
And it supplements all the other stuff. And it's a way like, listen, like what if you have something really strange and you want to be in a support group for people with ingrown toenails, it's probably a lot easier to make a 20-person support group for that if you have all of America than if it's just like one person who's like the therapist who knows, or the doctor or whatever who knows them. It just feels like you can like find all these really specific groups of people and make it easier for them to connect in a way that insurance could pay for it. And that would be
Cool.
kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Fun fact. I okay. This is really annoying. I will basically stop and talk to any dog on the street. I love dogs, or
Okay.
really any animals. But I just think it's so cute to like chat and with everyone's meet new dogs on the street all the time. And my family thinks that's really annoying, but I find it really cute, so I enjoy it.
Okay. Next time I visit close to a place,
Yeah.
I'll dress up like it, and
Mm.
then bring a dog with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. That'd be great.
Yeah, Fancy, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story and the businesses and some of the ups and downs. Would you be able to share some more information with our listeners about if they want to check out Terrawar, if they want to get in touch with you? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah. So on terawatt.co, that's our website, no M. We have a get in touch page. That's the best way. That either gets you can either like follow our newsletter or set up a call with me. And then if you're interested in just kind of more passively following on social media, our biggest medium, I guess you'd say, is LinkedIn.
Mhm.
And we do a lot there. I do a lot personally there, and then Terawatt also. That's where I'm posting usually my podcast or any thoughts I
Mhm.
have or writings. And yeah, those are the two probably the best ways.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Fancy. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ash. I appreciate it.
Cheers.